I'm starting in Deuteronomy chapter 6, starting in verse 1. I know, it's the Old Testament, guys. We're going to go there. Here we go. A few verses. Starting in verse 1. It says this. Let me catch you up to speed. Basically, what has happened is that you have the people of Israel. These are people that God himself has said, I'm going to make these guys my own holy, set-apart nation. It's a word we've used tonight. It's kind of this idea of distinction, that these guys are going to be different than anybody else. They're going to act like nobody else, and I'm going to make them a nation for myself. And so what he does is he makes them a promise. He says, hey, these people, I am going to actually bring them into a place where they get to thrive as a nation, where they get to thrive as a community in which I am their God and I am their leader. And then somewhere along the way, they end up being fully imprisoned and enslaved by this nation called Egypt. And they're enslaved and oppressed and abused by this nation in that period of time for over 400 years. And so God ends up doing something about this. He ends up going in there, rescuing them, freeing them. He demolishes this Egyptian regime that had his people under oppression. And he sets them free. And then a part of this process, he says, hey, I'm going to take you into this land that I've been promising your ancestors. I just need to take you this way first. And so they end up in the wilderness. And while they're in the wilderness, which basically means no man's land, while they're there, God ends up doing this thing where he gives them a set of regulations, a way of life, basically a set of rules to say, hey, if you're going to be my people, this is the way I want you to live. This is the way that I want you to behave. This is the way that I want you to kind of just operate as a people. And so when we pick up in this passage, this is just after God has actually used Moses and Aaron, these two guys, these two leaders of these people, to give out all of these rules and regulations and this way of life to the people. And that's where we pick up at this point. God tells Moses and Aaron to tell the people this. He says, these are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your heart. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. When the Lord your God brings you into the land he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to give you a land with large, flourishing cities you did not build, houses filled with all kinds of good things you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves you did not plant. Then when you eat and are satisfied, be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I want to talk to us around the topic, the heart wants what the heart wants. The heart wants what the heart wants. What do you want most this year? I recognize in a room like this, there's a lot of friends and people that I know very well, but there's a lot of you guys I actually haven't gotten to meet yet. So I kind of wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in America, pero no soy, like I said earlier, just Americano, soy Latino-Americano. And so I was raised in a Latin Pentecostal home, okay? Which basically meant I slept in pews while my parents were at midnight vigils and yada, yada, yada. That whole experience, right? And I kind of grew up around that. My mom, she's from Guatemala, and my dad is from Costa Rica, so I'm Costa Guat. That's kind of how you put those two things together. And I kind of was raised in that particular environment. Now, my dad, he's a very funny guy. I think I have a picture, an older picture of my dad and I, but this is a few years ago, I think when he was in Australia. Oh, there's half of me. If I stand over here, though, and kind of go down, no, don't move the camera, don't move the camera. See? basically. I used to have a really big beard. I can see it here, but it's a picture of my dad. Hopefully that resolves itself at some point. But it's a picture of my dad and I. Now, my dad, he is an incredibly big soccer fan, okay? Humongous soccer fan. So naturally growing up, my dad really wanted me to also enjoy soccer. I didn't really give him that. There we are. There's Guillermo Sancho. And so growing up, my dad really wanted to bond with me over soccer. And so because of that, he actually had me in soccer from the time I was 6 years old all the way until about 16 years old, with him as my coach. Okay, that was a long time. And look, to be honest, I was like, okay. Like, I wasn't bad. Like, I scored a goal or two, and I played goalie, so I don't know how that's possible, but I did it. I did it, and we don't ask questions. But we tried to bond over that. Now, I didn't really get to bond over that with him. It's something he really wanted. He really wanted to bond over soccer with me, but I didn't get that. He ended up finding that in my brother. But I wasn't too easy on that whole front either. I mean, growing up, I actually, at that same time, started really to get into the arts, and specifically theater. I was like a theater kid, and some of you are like, makes sense. But I was a theater kid kind of growing up. I really liked theater. I really liked acting and writing and all these sort of arts things. Now, my dad, he was never really anti that. He loved the fact that I had something that I loved. He was never sort of negligible or anything. He came to all the things that we did, but it just wasn't something that we really bonded over. And it was kind of hard because really what, a growing kind of teenage kid, for the most part, in most senses, you kind of just want a good relationship with your pops, right? That's what you really want. And so you have my dad really wanting to kind of bond with me in one sense, and I wasn't really giving him that. And I really wanted to be able to bond with my dad, and he really didn't have that. And then there was one fateful Christmas. And it changed a lot in our household. See, my brother and I, we actually owned a Wii, all right? And I'm embarrassed to say I actually have it in my house right now still. But we owned a Wii, and we were a bit of lack of games. And I remember one year I ended up opening at Christmas this long, narrow box. And in it was the game Guitar Hero 3. Yeah. Through the fire and flames, baby. All the way. If you don't understand that, I'm sorry. I'm just sorry. You need to get this game. It basically, for those of you who don't know, it's a game in which you are pretending to be a guitar player. You press a few buttons and it's supposed to mimic it, different levels of difficulty, yada, yada, yada. Now, this was a big deal for us because, one, I loved video games. My dad loved heavy metal, different story for a different time, and we both loved music. We loved music. And over the next year, we would spend hours playing this game together. Hours. I remember we would try to beat each other out and try to top each other's scores and all this stuff, and neither of us knew how to play real instruments, but we really loved this game, and we would spend hours and hours playing it. And I know it might seem silly, but it really changed. It really changed a lot. Fast forward, I end up giving my life to Christ, and one of the first positions that I get to serve in church life is as a bass player. And the only reason was because one day my dad said, "Why don't you actually try to learn a song on a real guitar?" And so he bought me my first ever $80 bass. And he put it in my hands, and he started giving me challenges to say, "Hey, learn this song, learn that song, learn this, learn that." And I would try, and I would learn. And that ended up progressing my journey in church life and getting involved, and it opened up so many ways of getting to know people and grow in Christ, and it all came back to Guitar Hero. And I just find it funny because what he really wanted was to be able to bond with me over this idea of soccer, of sport, and I didn't really give him that. And what I really wanted was him to bond over, sort of arts and things like that, and he wasn't giving me that. But it's funny how the only way we got the most out of our relationship was to discover what we really wanted most, which was just to have a good relationship. There's what we wanted, but then there was what we really wanted most. And our relationship only got better when we discovered what we really wanted most. So, what do you want most this year? What do you want most this year? Okay, now before I get back to this whole Deuteronomy passage, there's a couple of things that I really want to talk about, and we're going to come back to this idea of what Deuteronomy is encouraging us to do. But I want to talk about this idea about what you want, about the things you want in life, those sort of desires. There's a word that Scripture uses for this idea of the things you want in life. Like that stuff that your heart burns for, that stuff that you get really excited about, that stuff that wells up within you, like I would really love it if one day this, or whatever that might be, how you define that stuff for you. There's a word that the Bible uses for that, and that word is desire. Is desire. The things that you desire. Another word used in kind of its biblical definition is this idea of appetite. It's the stuff you crave for. It's the stuff that you actually want, that you yearn for. So when I ask that question, what do you want most this year? It's a question about your desires. It's a question about what you want, the things that you crave for this year, the things that you are hoping for. And I think that before we can fully understand what this Deuteronomy passage is trying to encourage us to do, is that we first kind of explore this idea of the things you want. And here's the first thing that I think is really important to really understand about the things you want in life is this. Number one, you and I, we're designed to want things. We are. Some of you came in this room and you've been thinking about your year. You've been thinking about the things that you want to see happen this year, and you're wondering, am I allowed to want this? Like, am I allowed to dream? Am I allowed to think about things in a big way? Am I allowed to put God really at His word to do something far beyond what I could ask, think, or imagine? And I just want to start off by saying, yes, you can. You were actually designed to want things. Young people, listen to me. You want something, you got something in your heart that's stirring, that you kind of yearn for, that you want to see happen in your life. You were designed like that. God has put that fire in you for a reason, and you and I have experiences where we actually want things, and that was put there on purpose. You and I were designed to want things. I mean, some of you want a really healthy family this year. Some of you want a really great time at school. Some of you, young people and youth, you want a good time at camp, don't you? You want a great time at camp. You want these things, and all these things are good, wholesome, and in most cases, godly. And you laugh because you know there's a tension. Because you and I, we are designed to want things, aren't we? We're designed like this. We're designed to dream. We're designed to want things. Psalm 21 says this, you have granted him, speaking of God, his heart's desires, and have not withheld the request of his lips. This is good news, people. You and I, we are actually designed to want things for your kids, for our church, for our family, for your school, for your friends. You got something in you firing up. You were made like that. But we laugh as well because we know there's sometimes a tension. Because here's the other thing that I know, and we all need to know about our desires, the things that we want, is that as followers of Jesus, we do believe in this problem called sin. And so what ends up happening is that sin makes you want things that you shouldn't and keeps you from things that you should. That you and I are designed to want things. That's not the problem. The idea of wanting things, wanting good things, is a God thing. But because we live in a broken reality, there are times where sin will actually make me want things that I shouldn't want and keep me from things that I should. I mean, think about it this way. This tension, this idea, right? Like there's things that you want and things that you want most, right? Because so much of life is not determined by what you want, but by what you want most. And so this idea of what you want, I'll prove it right here. How many of you at New Year's, at some point, I'm not saying a time, at some point, wanted to see fireworks? Raise of hands. That you just wanted to see fireworks. You were like, oh, that'd be cool. I'd love to see fireworks. Yeah, great. Keep your hands up if you want. Just keep your hands up for a second, nice and high. Okay. How many of you wanted to stay up till midnight? Look at all the hands that just went down. There's what you want, and then there's what you want most. I mean, the most classic example is physical health, right? I want to be really physically healthy. I want to be a physical specimen, right? Like you want to be really healthy. Here's my problem. I'm not projecting, but I also want to see how far I can go with my Macca's app deals. That's also what I want. There's what I want, and then there's what I want most. And this is what, okay, look, this is like vulnerability, like I'm in the safe space, right, with you guys? Okay, here's the deal. I'm recently married, okay, to my beautiful wife, Keely. I have not decided which part, whether it's something I want or something I want most, I have not decided which goes where, but here's the tension. I'm allergic to cats. Okay. Keely loves cats. So I'm caught in the tension between a cat-free marriage and an incredibly happy wife. What do I want? And what do I want the most? I've got a lot of peanut gallery telling me which way to go, but most of them say dog, just throwing it out there. There's what you want, and then there's what you want most. And we all feel this tension. And to be real, it goes beyond just sort of silly things like that, doesn't it? Like, can we be real? There are times where I really want to read more of my Bible. Can I just keep it real? I really want to read more of my Bible. And there are some times where I don't. There's what I want, but then there's what I want most, which sometimes is just to not do anything. Like, if we're really honest, like the idea of church, I get the privilege of being able to look after our church online, right? And so I know that there are so many valid, real reasons as to why we need to reach the world with the gospel using technology. I'm a full believer in it, 100%. And I've had a few conversations with a few friends in which the conversation is a tension between, do I go to church? Or do I really need to change out of my PJs? It's what I want. And there's what I want the most. And I'm not trying to cast judgment. I'm just trying to point to the fact that you and I always deal with this tension between what we want and what we want the most. And in our spiritual life, it'll come down to the difference between what you want and what you want the most. So what do you want the most this year? That's the big question. And here's why this is important. This is a big tension. Why are we even talking about this? What does it have to do with Deuteronomy? This is my big point, is that at the end of the day, my desires drive my direction in life. Like, what I want fuels me and thrusts me into direction of what I want the most. Like my behaviors, my actions, the time I spend thinking, the time I spend on my phone, the way I talk to people, the way that I articulate things, the way that I treat others, all of that stuff is thrusted into the direction of what I want the most. And the tension that I keep coming back to, I mean, we're in this idea of talking about spiritual disciplines the next 2 months, and we're talking about who are we becoming? And this big tension that I keep coming back to is that, let me summarize it like this. You are actually designed to want things. You are designed to want good things, godly things. But the fact that we live in a broken reality is the fact that sin sometimes makes us want things we shouldn't and keeps us from things that we should. And the reason why this is a really important thing to talk about is because ultimately my desires will drive my direction in life. And so I started asking myself, if my desires all sum up to disengaging me, bringing me away, taking me back, taking a step backward, or disassociating myself slowly even from the things that God wants me to do, then eventually I'll end up in a place I didn't think I wanted. Proverbs says it like this, 11:23, the desire of the righteous ends only in good, but the hope of the wicked only in wrath. And Scripture warns us of this. I mean, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 says this, but mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. So my Hills family, this is the question that I keep coming back to. This is the question that I keep wrestling with. Like, we're talking about wanting to become more like Jesus, and I'm here to tell you that this is something that I do want. I really do want. And I actually assume the best of this room to say that somewhere in you, you want God's best for your life. You want God to do something in your life that no one else could do, nothing else can do, that there's something in you that wants God. But the question I have to keep asking myself, and I keep coming back to, is God who I really want the most? Like, is he the one that I want the most? Allan, is your pastor? Chill out. The answer is yes. But let's be real. There are some times in life, even if it's just a moment, where the answer can feel like no. There was several years ago that I was in a counseling room and I was told that I met the criteria for social anxiety disorder. And it rocked me. I didn't realize that, you hear about it, you didn't realize all these different things, and I was told this, and I went through a long journey, and I'll tell that maybe another time, the sort of the full idea of that journey. But there are moments in that journey where, if I am really honest, I wanted relief more than I wanted God. Like I wanted the pain to go away more than I wanted God. Wanting God was too hard. Wanting God took a lot. Wanting to come to church was a lot. And it kind of led me into these really dark places and really kind of rough spots. And you have to think to yourself, is God what I really want the most? I mean, even a little lighter. I mean, for those that are single, I'm 29 years old. It's not a super old, but, I thought I was going to get married young. My parents were 26. My parents were 19 when they had me, and so obviously there's a lot of circumstances around that, but I really liked having young parents. So I thought, by the time I'm 26, I'm going to have 2 kids and be married. Nice. I turned 27, no ring, no girlfriend, no nothing, and I was lonely. Like, I know it's sort of funny, but I was lonely. I thought everything that I had dreamed about, gone. And at that point, I didn't, if I'm honest, I didn't want God. I wanted love. I wanted a family. I wanted good things. But I wanted them more than God. What about you? What happens when you want answers more than you want God? And you want clarity more than you want God? There's a temptation to leave God to get them. What happens when you want justice more than you want God? And all of a sudden you start looking at voices and ideologies and people that are out there somewhere who really think, wow, that sounds like the justice I'm looking for, and then abandon the God of all justice. What happens when we start wanting things more than we want God? Because remember that what you get out of your spiritual life isn't about what you want, it's about what you want most. And so is God who I really want the most this year? See, when you're Israel in the desert and you start wanting manna more than you want God, you'll look to Egypt to give it to you. Is God who I really want the most this year? Now, like I said, for a lot of us, the answer is like 2 + 2 = Jesus. The answer is yes. Right? Like we want God. We want God. And I think for a lot of us, we would say we actually do want God the most. We want to experience God the most. We actually desire that. We genuinely desire that. But we have this issue where there are some times where we don't. We actually don't want God the most. We want God, but sometimes we don't want God the most. Remember those decision-making places, right? Like we find ourselves in those tensions. And so when we have to think about, okay, well, what do I have to do to kind of keep my wants in order? Right? Like that's the big question, isn't it then? Like if the whole thing comes down to what I want the most, then how do I make sure that I keep wanting God the most? Right? How do I make sure that I keep my heart in the right direction? How do I make sure that what I want stays God? Because this is really the thing that we keep going in and out of, isn't it? It's this idea of, I want God, and then sometimes I want him the most, and then sometimes I don't want him the most, and it can feel like a cycle. It can feel like something we need to get out of. So how do I keep my heart pointed in the right direction? If this thing comes down to what I want the most, how do I keep wanting God? It's a really good question. Thanks for asking. See, now this is what I've really been wanting to get to this whole time. See, the Israelites, they're in an interesting position. They've got the same issue. They want to follow God, and sometimes they just want to follow God. And sometimes they do it well. Sometimes they show up, they do what they're told, but most often they don't. They mess up, they disobey, they find other gods, they find other idols, and they start worshiping other things. They disobey, and they're stuck in the cycle. And God does this incredibly interesting thing that we talked about at the beginning, where he actually gives them a law. He gives them a rule of life. He says, hey, this is how I want you to act. This is how I want you to be able to sort of operate as a society and all these things. Now, the most common sort of conception about the law is that it really is just a list of rules in which, hey, this is what you do, this is what you don't do, this is, it's kind of the lines for how society should, all this stuff. But then God does this really, really fascinating thing in the middle of the law. Like, go read it, it's in there, I promise. he gives them rhythms of festivals, like fiestas, like parties, like in the middle of the law. Like he all of a sudden just goes, and hey, by the way, this is how I want you to party. Like this is how I want you to celebrate. This is how I want you to actually have a nice meal and dinner, and this is how I want you to have fun, and this is how I want you to sort of make music and do all these. Like I want you to celebrate, and it's not just sort of arbitrary. God's making a point. He's saying, hey, part of this being, knowing me and wanting me is that you remember me. Is that you remember what I've done for you, that you celebrate that you take time not to ask me for things or to make up for things or to try to come with me with all your, not like all those things are good, but really, I want you to just remember me. I want you to have fun. I want you to eat at my table. I want you to enjoy. I want you to actually enjoy me. And God gives them the rhythms of festivals. And here's the pinnacle of what I find fascinating. Jesus quotes that passage. And he summarizes it in one sentence. It's when he's actually being tempted by the devil in the wilderness, and Satan actually asks Jesus to worship him. And Jesus responds, "It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." God in the Old Testament gives them a rhythm of festivals. He says, hey, this is how I want you to celebrate. This is how I want you to remember me. This is how I want you to do this thing. And Jesus summarizes by using this word called worship. Worship. How do you keep your heart in order? Worship. How do you keep your heart in the right direction? Worship. Let me say it like this. The discipline of worship puts God in his proper place, in his rightful place, and points your heart in the right direction. The discipline of worship. Some of us, we haven't thought about worship as a discipline. We've thought about worship as an expression, as something that we do in reaction to how I'm feeling. But you and I, we have the opportunity to actually think this year about worshiping as a discipline, as something we choose to do even when we don't feel like it, to ascribe to God his rightful due, to put him in his proper place, to actually worship God with our heart and our soul and our mind and our strength. Jesus says himself, it is written, worship the Lord your God. See, God wasn't just looking for an expression. He was looking for a commitment, and he was looking for the direction of our hearts. You and I, we want to get our wants in order. We want to get our desires in order. We want to want God the most. If this thing comes down to what I want the most, and we want to make sure that what I want the most is God, then you and I, we need to accept this invitation to worship, to give it all, to express the adoration and love that we have for the one who has loved us. That is the discipline. And there's so much time that we could spend trying to define worship. But I think there's two ingredients, two really big ingredients to worship that I hope can help you. And so if you're writing this down, I really believe these two ingredients, if we practice these things, it'll set our hearts in the right direction. The first thing is this, is awareness. You may not think that, but worship begins with an awareness. This idea of placing God. Like imagine like you're in school or something and you start walking in and imagine the difference between just walking in school like a normal day and walking in school God and going, okay, God, you're here. You're here. You're with me. You're in this place. You reign in and through everything I could possibly go through right now in this school and in my friends and anything that might come to me. You're here. I'm becoming aware of God. In your next business meeting, wherever you might be, you're thinking, okay, all of a sudden this meeting's going a little sideways, not the way that I thought it was going to go. And okay, God, you're here. You're present. You want the best in this place. I'm going to trust you that you are actually present. It begins with an awareness. And maybe it's this idea of your own personal relationships. Maybe it's your marriage where it's things getting a little tense, things are getting a little tough, and all of a sudden you just have to stop. You have to walk in and become aware of God. Say, God, you're here. You're in my marriage. You're in my relationship. You are here. Placing God. Now, mind you, awareness is not the practice of putting God somewhere, but realizing where he already is. That's the difference. So it's awareness. But the second half is adoration. Just this idea of honoring God. about ascribing to God what is rightfully due to him. I think Ava is her name, the one that was singing here and introduced the song. Ava, you did a brilliant job at already describing this. Yeah, big whoop whoop, honestly, because it was fantastic of this idea of ascribing to God his rightful due without trying to get anything in return. It's just acknowledging who God already is. So what does that look like? Back to your school. So you're in school and you start with awareness. You go, God, you're here. You're with me. You're in this place. And so now I'm going to ascribe to God his rightful due. And you reign in my life. You are good and you are kind and you will help me be kind to the people around me, to my teachers, to my fellow students. God, you are involved. You have not left me alone. You are fully present in where I might be. In that business meeting that goes a little sideways, you start with awareness. You go, God, you're in this meeting and I am not the head. Don't say that. But I am the head and not the tail. You are my provider. You are my sustenance. You are the provider for my business, for my personal life. You start ascribing to God what is rightfully him. He does not abandon me. In your marriage or your relationships or your relationship with your kids, you start to become aware. You start with worship and you start to become aware. You say, God, you're here. You're in my relationships. You are here with my kids. I know it doesn't look like that, but God, you are faithful to restore. You are the restorer. You are the reconciler. You are the one who goes before me and not behind me. This is the discipline of worship. You want God the most this year? So do I. There's going to be moments where we're going to want other things more than God. And when that moment comes, we've got to worship. We've got to become aware of who God is. We've got to give him adoration, because when we do, we start to realign our hearts. I'll say it this way. Worship is an invitation to reorient our hearts toward God. Worship is an invitation to reorient my heart toward God. The team can come and join me. If what you want most this year is whatever God has for you, then make worship not just an expression, although there's nothing wrong with that. Make worship a discipline, something that you choose to do. Because if I can be so bold to say, choosing God, even when you want to choose something else, is still an act of worship. You're not being disingenuous. You're not being fake. You're not being any of that. What you're choosing to do is to ascribe God what is rightfully his beyond what I might feel or be experiencing in a moment. If what you want most this year is whatever God has for you, then make worship a discipline, placing him first in what you say, in what you do, in how you think, and how you behave, not just when you want to, but even when you may not want to. And he will keep your heart in order. The psalmist says, Lord, search my heart. Restore to me the joy of your salvation. Be eager to worship. Be quick to praise. Be fast to speak of how good and great our God is. You want to get your heart in order, then become disciplined in worship. And as we close, I slowly was realizing that a lot of this message is an encouragement for us to really give something to God. And he's worth it, and I'm not taking back any of that. But the only way that this really makes sense is if you and I take the moment to remember what God has done for us. Like this idea of adoration and awareness and putting this much thought and putting this much effort, like it can seem like, wow, this is a lot of thinking for something like worship. But the reality is that when you realize how much God has done for us, there is no other response but to worship. See, that moment when I was told I met criteria for social anxiety disorder, I didn't know what to do. And I had really great people, they're in this room, who really helped me. And there's a lot of things that a lot of people can do to help in situations like that when your heart's a little bit out of order and it's a little bit disoriented and all those sort of things are happening inside of you. There's a lot of things that you could do, a lot of things that are really helpful. Professional counseling, 100%. Pastoral help, 100%. Good friends, 100%. But there was something that changed everything for me. And I got to be honest, I'm not a medical professional or anything like that. I am just a Christian who experienced these things and realized something for myself that I think is also true for people who may be experiencing the same thing. And that's this, is I was missing this sense of confession. Because the whole idea of your thoughts going wild is that you don't know what thoughts are good thoughts. Like if I don't mean to sound crass, but the whole point of that situation was the fact that my brain wasn't working right. So how do I trust my brain to give me the thoughts that are going to help me? So I needed something else other than what was going on in my head to really help me understand what was going on with God. So I immediately turned to the Word of God. And can I be fully vulnerable with you for a second? You know the thing that I kept telling myself, I had to tell myself over and over again for literally a year. Every morning I would wake up and tell myself, God is better than I think He is. God is better than I think He is. God is better than I think He is. On my best days, God is better than I think He is. On my worst days, God is better than I think He is. God is better than I think He is. He is the one that gives me the power to renew my mind through the power to transform my life through the renewing of my mind. He gives me that power. He gives me the power to demolish strongholds and demolish arguments that do not submit themselves to Christ Jesus. He gives me that power. And I had to rehearse and rehearse and rehearse. And some of you might, isn't that brainwashing? I mean, like, isn't that any form of change as you kind of just repeat? And I had to worship God in that way and put Him in His proper place. And can I tell you, it didn't happen in 2 months. It didn't happen in like 6 months. It happened over a course of time. And there are still moments where it's hard. But let me tell you something. When I put God in His rightful place and I point my heart in the direction of His love and His kindness and His hope and His goodness, then all of a sudden what I want the most is God. That's who I want the most. So I got to discipline my worship. I got to make sure that I keep getting back in there. I got to give it all. I got to give it all. I got to give it all, not just because God demands it from me, but because it's the only way I can respond to a God that good, to a God that helps me and heals me. Hillsong Church, if I can be so bold as to prophesy, Hillsong Church is a worshiping church. It was, it is, and it will be. It will always have the core sort of belief in which we give God our adoration no matter what might be going on, no matter what might be happening in the world, no matter what might be going on in my heart. We are a church in which when we gather together, we point our hearts in the direction of God. We point our hearts in the direction of goodness. We point our hearts in the direction of the bigness of God. And this is who we'll always be. So, I didn't want to end the service with just sort of an explanation. I wanted to end it with a bit of an invitation. I don't have a really clever close or anything like that, but I've asked the team to prepare a few songs. And basically, I just want to invite you, and I want to encourage you. You may have been a worshiper at the core, but there's more. There's more of God. There's more of what He wants for you. Young people, this week at camp, there's going to be a lot of things you want. If you go into it wanting God the most, I promise you God will show up. God will show up for you. God will blow your mind. He will go above and beyond what you could ask, think, or imagine. So I want to end with an invitation. I'm going to ask if all of us could stand. And we'll start just by closing our eyes, and we'll see kind of where this takes us. But I just want to end with an invitation. Maybe you're part of a group who genuinely, you actually could say that what you want the most is God. And I want to encourage you, fantastic, keep showing up, keep worshiping. Please set an example, set the bar, set the ability. When I see people worship and I know what's going on in their life, it is an inspiration to me because I know what it costs them to keep worshiping. But maybe you find yourself in the room and you, if you were honest with yourself, you said, last year and going into this year, there just might be a few things I want more than I want God. And we wanted to just extend the invitation to worship, to put God in His proper place, to leave the thing that you want more than God behind. It could be answers, it could be clarity, it could be love, it could be a relationship, it could be money, it could be security, whatever it might be, whatever that thing might be that you want more than God, this is an invitation to leave it behind you. The altar's open if you need to come to the front, if you need to pray, if you need to kneel, if you need to sit, whatever it might be, the team's going to start worshiping. And I would invite you, wherever you may be. So could we bow our heads, close our eyes, and maybe even extend your hands, whether it be out or up, whatever you might want to do, but extend your hands as an act of saying, God, I'm giving whatever I had over to you. Young people, before camp, this is a great time to just clean the slate. Say, God, all right, whatever you want this week, I want. So Lord, I pray in this place, I believe, Holy Spirit, that you are here. I thank you that you are present. And I thank you that you are the one who changes us, Lord, that you invite us into these disciplines and into these practices, but ultimately it's in recognizing you and encountering you that ultimately changes us. So Lord, right now in this room, would you change people? I believe in this room right now, there are people who have lacked joy last year. You're starting to get your joy back. There are people in this room who you haven't laughed in a while. You're gonna laugh again. There are people in this room that it felt like there's a tight you feel a tight in your chest because it just feels like you haven't been able to breathe this year. You're gonna breathe again. Jesus, thank you that you're faithful, that you're good, that you're kind, and that you encounter us as we encounter you. In Jesus' name.